Universities around the country are changing, and not for the better. College is getting more expensive, and as a result, students are taking on more debt. The average amount of debt for a 4-year degree from a public university is now over $35,000. Students are paying more, but they're getting less. Colleges are cutting majors, PhDs can't find jobs, more and more jobs are being taught by underpaid and overworked adjunct professors, and people are wondering if college is even worth it anymore. American universities used to be the envy of the world, but now they are associated with debt and decline. So how did we get here, and what can we do about it? We can break the problem down into 3 parts, but it begins with the rise of a new model of education where students became customers. Northeastern University published an article listing 10 benefits to getting a college degree. These benefits were things like future earnings and job stability. They also mentioned things like improved self-esteem and personal growth, but the vast majority of what they write about are economic benefits. It all really boils down to this. If you go and get a college degree, maybe from a place like Northeastern, you will eventually make more money. What wasn't mentioned at all in this article was education, namely knowledge and the value of the pursuit of knowledge. The rhetoric that we see from Northeastern University isn't that uncommon, but it does represent a massive shift in how universities see themselves and market themselves. Because you see, our modern university system is still heavily based on a model that we get from 19th century Germany. This is a model that's based on the unity of teaching and research. The man behind this model is Friedrich Wilhelm Christian Karl Ferdinand von Humboldt. I had to look at my notes while I said that name. This is why we have professors who don't simply teach. They're also world-class researchers. See, at a university, we expect our teachers to teach classes to students, of course, but we also want them to run labs, write books, publish research articles, and become experts in not just their general field, but in specialized topics within that field. To be a good professor, you teach and you research. This is why you could look at a school like Harvard, and its motto is simply Veritas. That's Latin for truth. The pursuit of truth and then its transmission to students is core to the university. Or at least it was. Now, universities aren't really selling themselves as places where you can relentlessly pursue the truth and get a terrific education. Instead, they're treating your college degree as an investment in your future success. That's why a school like Northeastern would list the benefits of a college education as increased marketability or networking opportunities. They didn't mention anything like learning from world-class experts in your field, or even appealing to a more general and profound motivation like wanting to live the life of the mind. Instead, it is all about how the college degree is going to help you earn money. Universities can market themselves by saying, hey, the best path towards a better life is to get a college degree. So you should pay us a lot of money so that we can sort of send you down that path. And at the end of that path is more money. Essentially, college becomes an investment that you really hope pays off, and the content of your particular degree doesn't really matter. And when universities think of themselves this way, they're not really treating their students like students anymore. They're treating their students like customers. They're treating them like people they want to sell something to. They start offering services, amenities, newer and nicer gyms, experiences. All of it gets packaged into this college thing. And education isn't really the focus. They also focus quite a bit on branding and marketing like a clothing or a media company would. And that's because they're selling a product. One of the ways they market themselves is through the US News and World Report. This is a website that provides rankings of various kinds for colleges and universities. It's where you'd go if you want to see the 100 best colleges in the country or the 10 best nursing schools in the Northeast. These rankings are actually quite influential. A lot of potential students consult them to figure out what schools they might want to apply to. Not so much for elite schools like Harvard or Yale, but definitely for state schools or smaller schools. They can get a lot of potential students or potential customers if they do better on these rankings. These rankings make such a big difference, actually, that now universities pay US News and World Report's money so that they can use the rankings branding in their advertising materials. Sometimes they're paying tens of thousands of dollars for the right to do that. Students can tell that they're being sold something, and they've actually started to view themselves as customers too. In one survey, 65% of students said that they view themselves as customers either inside or outside of the classroom when they're viewing themselves in relation to their university. They don't necessarily see themselves as joining some grand institution that's all centered around a common goal, like, pursuing knowledge or getting a great education, but instead they view themselves as buying something. And whatever it is they're buying, they are using student loans to pay for it. And that's the second part of the problem. The average cost of a 4-year degree at a public university in the United States has risen by 141% over the last 20 years. If you look just at private universities, it's risen by 181%. That far outpaces inflation. In 1963, a year of tuition at a public university would be about $243. In 2023, it was $9,750. Most people don't have that kind of money lying around, so if they want to go to college and they're being told that they have to go to college in order to be economically successful, they need to find some way to pay for it. And so they take out student loans to do so. And as a result, there is now $1.7 trillion of student loan debt in the United States. Personally, I graduated with about $25,000 in student loan debt, which was about the average when I got my degree. I was able to pay my student loans off early, in part because I didn't take any new debt when I went to graduate school. But I think my experience is pretty far from the norm. And in fact, many people struggle to pay back their student loans at all. According to the Education Data Initiative, about 8% of student loan debt is in default at any given time. It's about $136 billion worth of debt. And in some extreme cases, people make monthly payments, but they can't even pay enough to cover the interest on their debt. So every month, actually, they owe more than what they did the month before. Student loans are filling a gap in part by a decline in public funding for universities that happened around the time of the Great Recession. Between 2008 and 2013, state funding for universities declined by about 20%. It has rebounded somewhat, maybe even significantly, but it actually hasn't hit that pre-Great Recession level of spending. At least in universities, we are still feeling the effects of the Great Recession. That strikes me as particularly weird because there are now college students who were being born in 2008 when the Great Recession was really just getting started. So now we're trapped in this vicious cycle where tuition rises, students take on more debt in order to fund their education, and then if there are any budgeting shortfalls in the future, well, tuition rises again and students take on more debt. As long as colleges can keep up enrollment, they'll still get access to all of that money. And we'll talk about the enrollment problem a little bit later in the video. So here's where we are. We tell students that in order to be economically successful, they need to go to college. And then we tell them how much it costs, and when they realize they can't afford it, they take out student loans. Then universities just need to keep them enrolled and happy for at least 4 years, and everything kinda sorta works out. This is a massive system that is essentially supported by 18-year-olds taking out tens of thousands of dollars in debt. But with all of this money coming in, we should be asking a bigger question, which is where is the money going? Because I think if you want to know what an institution's priorities are, you shouldn't look at what it says. You should look at where it spends its money. So are universities taking all of this money that's coming in and using it on faculty and research, the core parts of a university? Well, somewhat, but increasingly more and more money is being spent on student services and administrators. This is a phenomenon that's known as administrative bloat. At Harvard, there is now roughly one administrator for every student. If you run those numbers, you'll see that that means that there are about 3 administrators for every member of the faculty. There's a similar problem at Yale where over about a 10-year period, there was a 45% increase in administrators. In that same 10-year period, the student body at Yale increased by about 600 students. Now, according to the Progressive Policy Institute, there is little evidence that the dramatic expansion in staffing for administrative and student services improves students' academic experience. In fact, some observers contend that the explosion in non-faculty has made it harder for faculty to educate students. As administrations get more and more bloated, they don't just take money away, they actually make it harder for faculty to do their jobs and provide an education. And in fact, due to budget shortfalls, many universities are doing something rather drastic. They're cutting departments and majors. The University of Connecticut, which is a flagship state university, recently announced that about 70 major programs were going to be put under review and possibly eliminated. Most of those were in the humanities, social sciences, and languages. Full disclosure, in case this matters, I got my PhD from the University of Connecticut. I do feel a sense of loyalty and responsibility, and the philosophy department at UConn was one of the departments that was being reviewed. I don't think they're going to cut the philosophy department, but I thought I would mention this. This isn't only happening at UConn, though. 2 schools in the University of North Carolina system also announced fairly substantial cuts of majors and a couple of departments. One of those schools even cut its physics major. They even cut minor programs for languages like Chinese and Russian. But for those classes that are still being taught, they are increasingly being taught by adjunct faculty. Adjuncts are often part-time workers. They're not full university faculty, Instead, maybe they live near a university and they teach 1 or 2 classes a year as just like a part-time gig. But there's also a substantial number of adjunct faculty who are PhDs who weren't able to get a tenure track job, mostly because there aren't enough jobs for people with PhDs now. Then they want to stay in academia as best they can, so they piece together a living by teaching a couple of classes at 1 or more universities every semester. These are people in very low paying positions with little to no institutional support. Many of them work really hard and really care about their students, but the institutions are not doing much to actually support them and help them provide a quality education. If you went to a community college or you went to any sort of like large university, then there's a pretty good chance you had at least one adjunct professor. So we have an increasingly expensive product, but more of the revenue that's coming into universities is being spent on things that are only tangentially related to that education. And this should make us ask a really big question, which is, what does the future hold for a university system? Because I'll be honest, I don't think things can continue this way. Even if many people in these institutions are doing their best and trying to do well by their students, it's just not a system that's set up well to help students or faculty thrive. It's a system that is straining under its own weight. You know, there are lots of people who go and they say, I want to become a professor, so they go and get a PhD. And then you figure out that there really aren't enough jobs for all the people with PhDs. So you have to go do something else. And many institutions are also seeing declining enrollments because students are looking at a college education, seeing how much it costs, and they're wondering if it's still worth it. They're seeing that you can make decent money doing blue collar work and you don't have to go $35,000 into debt to do it. And for some people, that sounds like a pretty good deal. I am skeptical of this move that a lot of people want to make, which is to say, forget college, forget universities, just tell everybody to go into the trades. I'm skeptical of people who say that that's the solution, but I also think that there's a lot of dignity in blue collar work, and for some people, it's clearly the right choice. A university education shouldn't be seen as a moral or an economic necessity for anyone. But I do think we're too quick if we say everyone should go and get blue collar jobs or work in the trades because there's nothing of value being done at a university. You should think about the value of an education and whether or not it's the right thing for you. If someone came to me and said, is going to college worth it? I would have to ask them, what is it that you value? If you're just looking for better job prospects, I do think there's probably an economic argument for going to college, even if student loans are pretty awful. And I could see why people say that's a lot of money to spend on job training that I don't really feel like I need. I get that line of thinking. I also think eventually people are going to stop requiring a bachelor's degree for entry-level jobs specifically. Right now, employers just use it as like a filter to make it easier to pick a candidate, but I think eventually we're going to realize that's kind of a stupid thing to require. But it is still definitely possible to go to a college and get a great education. When I've taught at a couple of different schools, I quickly came to learn that students basically get whatever they're willing to put into their classes. If you are interested in the material, you're willing to read on your own, you maybe want to come to office hours and talk about the material with your professors just because it interests you, one, your professors generally will be very happy about that because they're desperate for people to just like give a damn. But two, you'll probably do pretty well in school, you'll learn a lot, and you'll grow as a person. And that's wonderful. But it's very easy for you as a student to just view your classes as something you need to get done so that you can go do whatever it is that you want, and then you graduate, and no one's ever going to ask about your grades, and very few people are ever going to ask about your major. You're just going to be able to say, I went to college, and maybe you'll get a slightly better job because of that. Treating college like that feels like a waste of money. Don't go into $35,000 of debt just to check a couple of boxes. That sounds awful. And for those of you who are just sad about the state of universities and the massive amount of tuition and debt that they require, I would also encourage you to look at alternatives, because we don't necessarily have to be at a university in order to keep educating ourselves. Lately, I've been involved with a group called the Catherine Project. This is a nonprofit group that runs reading groups about the great books. I'm in a group right now about Kierkegaard's The Concept of Anxiety once a week. We read about a chapter a week, and then we meet for 90 minutes and we just discuss the book and we see where our ideas take us. There are grad students involved, there are people with PhDs, but there are also people who didn't even go to college, and we all just still have great discussions. I don't find myself thinking, oh, well, that person clearly went to school and that person didn't. That's not how the group works. It's bringing a university kind of great book style education to more and more people. And actually, it's totally free. The Catherine Project essentially relies on donations and volunteers to keep running. Because of that, it's still fairly small, but it's growing and it's doing something really cool. And there's no reason to think that more and more things like that shouldn't start. and actually would represent some kind of opportunity for us to sort of take our education into our own hands. And not just an education over the course of 4 years, but actually lifelong education where you get to continue learning until you die. These are the sorts of issues that I'm trying to tackle on my channel. How we can take control of our minds and our intellectual life, even if we're in systems that aren't particularly friendly to it. That's actually related pretty closely to the topic of my next video, which is about your phone. I wanted to answer the question, why can't we stop scrolling? Especially when so many of us know that infinite scrolling isn't good for us, and it's getting in the way of our ability to think about the world. And as I was researching, I started going in directions I wasn't expecting. Yeah, I talk about algorithms, but that video also talks about outrage and the philosophy of anger and anxiety, and a lot of other topics that I think shed some light on this problem of phone addiction. And you could watch that video right now on Nebula. Nebula is an independent creator-owned streaming platform with some of your favorite thoughtful creators. You want to watch a video essay about music or film? Nebula has that. You want something about culture or politics or history? Nebula has that too. I put all of my videos up on Nebula first. I am always a video ahead on Nebula. I love watching videos on Nebula. There are no ads. It's a clean, simple UI. It is basically just designed to showcase the quality content on the platform. On top of that, there are creators who are making premium original content just for Nebula, like the Nebula First Jetlag. This is like a massively popular travel game show. It's a lot of fun. The reason the team behind Jetlag can make something like that is because Nebula actually invests back in creators. It helps us make high quality original content that involves quite a lot of time and risk. Without Nebula's support, creators really wouldn't be able to do something like that. This is also how you get documentaries like Boomers or short films like Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend. It was one of the many reasons I was proud to join Nebula. It's good for creators, but it's also good for viewers too. If you want to watch that video right now or any of that other content, you can sign up for Nebula using my link. That's go.nebula.tv/Jared Henderson, and you can save 40% on an annual subscription. Don't worry, there's a link down in the bio, so you don't have to remember the full link. If you sign up, you'll be supporting Nebula, but you'll also be supporting my channel.